Good evening, everyone, and lovely to see you all again and many familiar faces. It's wonderful to welcome Venerable Myōgen back again to join us for another fantastic topic. So, welcome, everyone. I'll do a brief introduction before I'll pass over to Venerable for um, some meditation before we get into this wonderful topic. So, the topic that we have tonight, and I do have to say, I really love all of the topics of the talks that you do for us, Venerable. They're just fantastic. They have these really interesting titles. Like I'm immediately sucked into to the topics. So the one for this evening is how wonderful is this body? Enlightenment of a Snake Princess. So this is the radical story of the princess who attained Buddhahood and what it can mean for personal and social transformation. So the talk tonight is going to be talking about the Lotus Sutra story of the Naga Princess, who is an 8-year-old snake girl who attains Buddhahood in an instant, challenging our assumptions about enlightenment, particularly around who is worthy, what is possible, and how does transformation really happen. So I know, like many people, I'm actually completely unfamiliar with this sutra, so I'm very excited to hear all about it. So to introduce Venerable Myōgen, they are a monastic trained in the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya lineage as a bhikshu or bhikkhu, and in the Tendai tradition as a priest. Myōgen completed Tendai esoteric training and exam in Chiba, Japan, and they became a Buddhist in their early teens through encountering the story of Shakyamuni Buddha and an early interest in questions on suffering, sickness, and death, threaded by family history, personal illness, a queer identity, and an early empathy for animal life. Through volunteering with diverse groups and traditions, visiting different communities and teachers, they developed a pan-Buddhist perspective. Practicing the Lotus Sutra brought on a deep faith in the one vehicle perspective, in the integration of methods as taught by the teachers who emphasize direct and personal experiences. So with that in mind, Venerable, I'd like to pass over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Johnny and Tina, and having me again here at Metta Center. Great. We will start with just silent meditation. Um, I will lead through some kind of gentle stretches to settle the body. But first, you'll just tilt your head forward and then backwards and forward and back. Be very gentle, back to center. None of this needs to be a deep stretch. It's just moving the body, moving the blood. And then looking to the left and the right, left and right. Back to center. And then very gently rotating the head twice in each direction. And back to center. And rolling the shoulders in big circles, twice in each direction. And then lifting the shoulders towards your ears and squeezing, holding your breath, and then exhale and drop, letting go of any tension. And then once more, lifting, squeezing, and exhale and drop. Then you can take your right hand, place it on your left knee, and then looking over the left shoulder, giving a gentle twist to the spine, and switching sides, so left hand, right knee, looking over the right shoulder. And then back to center. And placing your hands comfortably in your lap. If available, you can place your right hand in your lap with your left hand on top. And the thumbs are lightly touching, forming a kind of semicircle. The shoulders are relaxed. The elbows are just slightly away from the body, making some space in the armpit. And to the best of your ability, imagining a line from the tip of your nostril to your navel, bringing the tip of the nostril in line with the navel will bring the body in a kind of upright alignment. And if it's too difficult to hold or there's discomfort, it doesn't allow you to relax and, of course, adjust. Regardless of where the body is, how it is, as much as possible to have an alert position, as well as relaxing the muscles and skeleton, letting the body sink into your seat, finding a balance between these two, avoiding the extreme of relaxing so much so that we fall asleep, or being so alert that the mind becomes agitated. And keeping the eyes half closed, bringing your attention to your breath. Letting the breath be natural. It's experiencing the quality of the breath. Whether it's deep or shallow. Short or long. Smooth or windy. If the air is cool or warm on your nostrils. Maybe you can sense the breath entering through the nostrils, down into the throat and lungs. Continuing to observe the quality, not placing any value or judgment on the breath. Simply breathing. And catching the mind as we start drifting off to other topics or thoughts. So nostalgia for the past or fantasy. Noticing it. Bringing our attention back to the experience and quality of the breath. Noticing how it changes over time. Changes through attention. Now, in the meditation, inhaling deeply, holding this breath for a moment, and then as you exhale, imagine the breath going throughout all of the pores of the body, entering the room, the space around you, releasing any kind of tension. One more time, inhaling deeply, and then exhaling the breath into the room. Opening the eyes slowly and adjusting to the light and the space around you. And you can rub your hands together quickly so that they're warm. And then placing them gently over your eyes, letting the warmth sink in. When you're ready, slowly moving the fingers down and letting the light back in. Then massaging around the eye socket. Notice on the edge of the bone where the eyebrows are, temples, right on the cheek. Make tiny, gentle circles or press gently, relieving any kind of tension stored in the face, you know, of being very in the front of our minds. You know, this stress we're holding. Good. Great. Welcome. Uh, Good to massage the eyes before looking at a screen. For those of you on the screen. uh, um, so let me get my screen out, my presentation. Uh, that's showing up okay. Uh, so how wonderful is this body? The enlightenment of a snake princess. So this is a story from the Lotus Sutra, as was mentioned. Those of you that are familiar with the Lotus Sutra maybe you read it or heard the name of it. It's a very important sutra for East Asian Buddhism, maybe one of the most influential. The Tendai school is the first indigenous Chinese school, and it's sometimes called the Lotus School as well, because it's based on this structure that's given to us by the Lotus Sutra. We could have many, many classes on just the Lotus Sutra itself, but we will not be doing that with just a very small portion of one chapter. I will cover some of the kind of main themes. But for some background, the Tiantai school, as I mentioned, is the first indigenous school of Chinese Buddhism. And it was during a period when many kinds of Buddhism were coming into China. And many people from China were going to India or having Silk Road trades, right? People were getting all kinds of texts, and there were different Vinayas and different teachers. And sometimes it seemed like these things were contradictory or did not make sense. Maybe we're experiencing that now a little bit, in the West, where we're receiving many kinds of well-established Buddhism that are very strong, a very clear doctrine or practice. So we get exposed to a lot of this, and we might be trying to make sense or kind of sticking to one that really speaks to us individually. Um, so with the Tiantai school, they were trying to figure this out, this issue. And one of the ways they did that is through the Lotus Sutra, which teaches what's called Ekayana, one vehicle Buddhism. And you hear of these terms like Hinayana, a small vehicle, Mahayana, great vehicle, Vajrayana, the like diamond or adamantine vehicle. Um, and these vehicles are more like orientation. They're not really like a school, right? It's just like a broad category for a type of orientation of a practitioner. Um, Now you hear this term Theravada, which is a Vinaya school. Like I'm from the Dharmaguptaka, right? So the parallel would be Theravada. So it's referencing the set of Vinaya texts and ordination lineage that they're using. It's not really denoting a school. Although nowadays we might say there's a Theravada school in addition to the Theravada Vinaya. Um, Again, maybe other people have different explanations. That's fine. But for the purposes of this presentation, we'll go there. Um, so this Lotus Sutra became very important for many schools of Buddhism and still found. There's even some now schools of Buddhism that focus exclusively on the Lotus Sutra, even just reciting the name. For the Tendai tradition, it was the kind of guiding principle for the whole tradition. So we also practiced meditation, like shamatha vipassana. Precepts are very important. Pure Land practice is very important. Many different kinds of Buddhas and practices and sutras were all incorporated. Um, we weren't like an exclusive school. Broadly, Mahayana, even esoteric and Vajrayana is incorporated through this Ekayana approach. Ekayana saying that all the various teachings of the Buddha lead to the same goal. They have the same purpose, which was to lead each person to develop the aspiration to become a Buddha themselves. And so every single teaching is an adaptation for a certain kind of characteristic or individual or time or place, that they're not contradictory, but established upon one another in this comprehensive view. And so we're talking about the snake princess, which is one of the stories in the Lotus Sutra. And I have a picture of a snake princess. You may have seen this kind of image. Maybe they have in Thailand, Thai Buddhism, the Nagas. Sometimes they're shown as actual snakes, or sometimes as half human, half snake. You also see this image in Tibetan Buddhism. And Japan and China, the Nagas often look more like dragons, but they're still Nagas. Sometimes it'll be a human being with a bunch of dragons behind them. So all kinds of manifestations of this Naga imagery. And they are believed to live underwater or in the deep earth, and have many, many treasures. So she's holding a precious jewel in her hand. And I'll have some more pictures of Nagas and Bodhisattvas to kind of break up some of the walls of text I have for you. Let's go to the next. So the question presented is, can children, women, animals, and spirits become awakened? You can answer that. You can raise your hand if you wish. You believe this is possible or not possible. Different schools and traditions have their opinions on this. From the perspective of the Naga Princess, we are offered a different view. As I mentioned, the intention of the Buddha, this is a quote from chapter 16 of the Lotus Sutra. So I teach the Dharma in various ways according to their ability to be saved. I'm always thinking, by what means can I cause sentient beings to be able to enter the highest path and quickly attain the Dharma? The highest path, becoming a Buddha, right? And we have other parables, illustrations in the Lotus Sutra talking about different paths, right? And kind of the orientation of a person, whether it's their level of confidence or the type of aspiration they have, right? For their own maybe relief of suffering in this lifetime, or just their own liberation or the liberation of others, varying degrees. And then kind of explaining how the Buddha himself taught, right? And why he gave these different teachings. The primary themes in the Lotus Sutra, as I mentioned, was the one vehicle. So the Buddha teaches for one purpose, which is to lead others to full Buddhahood. And the second theme is the teachings are varied for different desires and capacities of people. We can even see this through the sutras, early sutras as well. Buddha was teaching it's recorded that he was teaching to different groups, right? And they would ask different questions. And based on their causes and conditions and questions, the Buddha would give a teaching specific to them. And so he was not a systematic preacher, right? There wasn't like a theory of everything or a doctrine that he set out to teach by sequence, but it was through the causes and conditions that he met. So even when we talk about the omnipotence of the Buddha, it's with what he apprehends or perceives at the moment. It's not that it's just like a cosmic creator God level where everything all at once and all times is known simultaneously, but it's said that the Buddha has to put his attention towards it, and then it's the knowledge is kind of like revealed or arises, right? So the Buddha employs numerous methods to lead us to obtain skillfulness. So we can see there's different sutras, different meditation techniques, different objects of contemplation, different precepts, different ways of being a practitioner. These are all adapted to each individual or type of person. And one of the other major themes is this universal potential. So all beings, when they aspire to become a Buddha, will become a Buddha, right? Once they make a connection, it's inevitable that this will happen. And so we come to the story of the Naga Princess, one of the many stories. So, what do we know about Nagas or princesses? Um, if anyone would like to comment what they know about a Naga, I'm happy to hear. Um, Especially, there's different traditions, right? So sometimes there's these different stories that appear. Um, so feel free to share in the chat, and I think maybe Johnny can interrupt and read some of them. As well as what do we know about princesses, right? Like this concept, why is she's not just a Naga, right? She's a Naga princess. So it's like an extra level that's happening there. And here's an image, one of a Chinese style image of a Naga princess. So she doesn't look very snake-like, but she is holding this flaming jewel or wish-fulfilling pearl. So for the Naga princess, one of the ways I look at her being is we're told that she's just turned 8 years old. So she's a child. She's not an adult. This gives her a special status compared to maybe us or the assembly, which is usually adults that are practicing the Dharma. Um, she still doesn't have autonomy. She's also a girl. She's not male. Um, we hear in a lot of sutras talk about we tend to prioritize or be very focused around the male experience, partly due to bhikshunis not, so female monastics, not appearing until later on, but also the first monastics were male, so the Buddha was often giving talks to men, and then men were the ones that were recording. So there is a kind of bias that we might say is within the sutras and texts um, the Buddha himself being male. Another aspect is that she has a snake body, so she doesn't have a perfect human body, something that we also will talk about in Dharma, that, the best body for our practice is a human body. So animal bodies or spirit bodies are not suitable vessels for Dharma practice. They come with different kinds of obstacles. Nagas often are considered, even though they're kind of like a supernatural being, they're considered in the animal realm. So just like in the human realm, we have varying degrees of um, maybe human ability. Like some people are very smart, right? Or some people are very athletic. We have different, spectrum of human bodies and abilities. So same in the animal realm. Some animals can transform into people or human-like forms. They can take on different shapes, or they have certain kinds of powers or abilities that are more exceptional than maybe your pet dog, right? Maybe you've had many dogs, and some dogs are a little bit, better at games or commands, and others are more empathetic, and some are more mean. You have different types. So we can just use this to kind of demonstrate this spectrum of body. Uh, so given all this, she's a bit socially othered. She's not conforming with the normal or like expected, right? A practitioner, right? She's not a male monastic listening to the Buddha. She's not a celestial bodhisattva coming from another realm. Nagas themselves, within their own category, they're considered noble kind of creatures. So they are thought to be very wealthy. They live in palaces. They have all kinds of treasures. They're very into cleanliness. And so they have this nobility to them. But at the same time, there's this lowly quality. They're an animal. They're snakes, which are very close to the earth. And they're thought to live underground or deep in the ocean. So physically in the world, they're quite low, right? Um, Again, as I mentioned, they're animal, but a spiritual animal. So they're presenting this other kind of contrast. And they're also considered very virtuous. So they really wish to be around and protect virtuous people and practitioners, and you have to approach them with the right attitude. At the same time, they're thought to be very vengeful. So if you, like, for example, pollute their homes, which would be like a lake or stream, it said you can kind of have many kind of health issues because it will have a kind of spiritual vengeance upon you, cause you all kinds of problems. So the Nagas embody these kinds of contrasting elements. And so her awakening story, briefly, and then I'll read the sutra. It's not that long. And I might kind of abbreviate parts, but so she has a challenge by the Shravakas, the hearers. So these are the arhats, like a Shariputra. They claim that her obscurations are heavy, and their own proximity as practitioners. She gives an analogy. She gives her precious jewel. This jewel, each Naga is said to possess a jewel which is more precious than their own life. So she gives this jewel to the Buddha, and there's a conviction and act representative of her faith, that is the catalyst. And then she has a transformation. So she goes through all the stages of becoming a Buddha as proof of the power of the Lotus Sutra and her own aspirations and training under Manjushri. Um, I'm going to stop. I'll switch. I can just switch to the screen. I'm going to read from the sutra. You're welcome to listen to this as a kind of meditation. With sutra recitation, in my tradition, we talk about reading the sutra with your body, right? So it's the sutra is our life, us. Right? So we see ourselves in the sutra. It's not this like thing out there that we're reading, but something that is spoken to and teaching us directly. I'll begin. At that time, Manjushri was seated on a 1,000-petaled lotus blossom, big as a carriage wheel, and the bodhisattvas who had come with him were also seated on jeweled lotus blossoms. Manjushri had emerged in a natural manner from the palace of the Dragon King Sagara in the great ocean, and was suspended in the air. Proceeding to Holy Eagle Peak, he descended from the lotus blossom, and having entered the presence of the Buddhas, bowed his head and paid obeisance to the feet of the two world-honored ones. When he had concluded these gestures of respect, he went to where wisdom accumulated was and exchanged greetings with him, and then retired and sat at one side. Bodhisattva, wisdom accumulated, questioned Manjushri, saying, "When you went to the palace of the Dragon King, how many living beings did you convert?" Manjushri replied, "The number is immeasurable, incapable of calculation. The mouth cannot express it. The mind cannot fathom it. Wait a moment, and there will be proof." Before he had finished speaking, countless bodhisattvas seated on jeweled lotus blossoms emerged from the ocean and proceeded to Holy Eagle Peak, where they remained suspended in the air. These bodhisattvas had all been converted and saved by Manjushri. They had carried out all the bodhisattva practices and all discussed and expounded the 6 paramitas with one another. Those who had originally been voice hearers expounded the practices of the voice hearer when they were in the air, but now all were practicing the great vehicle principle of emptiness. Manjushri said to Wisdom Accumulated, "The work of teaching and converting carried out in the ocean was as you can see." At that time, Bodhisattva Wisdom Accumulated recited these verses of praise. "Of great wisdom and virtue, brave and stalwart, you have converted and saved immeasurable beings. Now those in this great assembly, as well as I myself, have all seen them. You expound the principle of the true entity, open up the law of the single vehicle, broadly guiding many beings, causing them quickly to attain Bodhi." Manjushri said, "When I was in the ocean, I constantly expounded the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law alone." Bodhisattva Wisdom Accumulated questioned Manjushri, saying, "The sutra is very profound, subtle, and wonderful, a treasure among sutras, a rarity in the world. Are there perhaps any living beings who, by earnestly and diligently practicing this sutra, have been able to attain Buddhahood quickly?" Manjushri replied, "There is a daughter of the Dragon King Sagra who has just turned 8. Her wisdom has keen roots, and she is good at understanding the root activities and deeds of living beings. She has mastered the Dharanis, has been able to accept and embrace all the storehouse of profound secrets preached by the Buddhas, has entered deep into meditation, thoroughly grasped the doctrines, and in the space of an instant conceived the desire for Bodhi and reached the level of non-regression. Her eloquence knows no hindrance, and she thinks of living beings with compassion, as though they were her own children. She is fully endowed with blessings, and when it comes to conceiving in mind and expounding by mouth, she is subtle, wonderful, comprehensive, and great. kind, compassionate, benevolent, yielding. She is gentle and refined in will, capable of attaining Bodhi. Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated said, when I observe Shakyamuni thus come one, I see that for immeasurable kalpas he carried out harsh and difficult practices, accumulating merit, piling up virtue, seeking the way of the Bodhisattva, without ever resting. I observe that throughout the 1,000,000,000-fold world there is not a single spot, tiny as a mustard seed, where this Bodhisattva failed to sacrifice body and life for the sake of living beings. Only after he had done that was he able to complete the Bodhi way. I cannot believe that this girl, in the space of an instant, could actually achieve correct enlightenment. Before his words had come to an end, the Dragon King's daughter suddenly appeared before the Buddha, bowed her head, and then retired to one side. And then she offers a praise to the Buddha. And at that time, Shariputra said to the dragon girl, you suppose that in this short time you have been able to attain the unsurpassed way. It's difficult to believe. Why? Because a woman's body is soiled and defiled, not a vessel for the law. How could you attain the unsurpassed Bodhi? The road to Buddhahood is long and far-stretching. Only after one has spent immeasurable kalpas pursuing austerities, accumulating deeds, practicing all kinds of paramitas, can one finally achieve success. Moreover, a woman is subject to the 5 obstacles. First, she cannot become a Brahma, heavenly king. Second, she cannot become the king chakra. Third, she cannot become a Mara king. Fourth, she cannot become a wheel-turning sage king. Fifth, she cannot become a Buddha. How then could a woman like you be able to attain Buddhahood so quickly? So at that time, the dragon girl had a precious pearl, and she presented this to the Buddha, and the Buddha immediately accepted the pearl. And she says to Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated and the Venerable Shariputra, I presented this precious jewel, and the world-honored one accepted it. Was that not quickly done? They replied very quickly. And she says, employ your supernatural powers and watch me attain Buddhahood. It will be even quicker than that. And at that time, the members of the assembly all saw the dragon girl in the space of an instant change into a man, carry out all the practices of a bodhisattva, immediately proceed to the spotless world of the south, take a seat on a jeweled lotus, and attain impartial and correct enlightenment with the 32 features and 80 characteristics. He then expounds the wonderful Dharma for all living beings everywhere in the 10 directions. So that's kind of an interesting story, hopefully. It's very short compared to other parables in the Lotus Sutra. And there's a couple standout things that we'll go through. And if you have any questions on that, different aspects, I'm happy to discuss as well in the question and answer in case I didn't cover some of the interesting points and complications that we see in this sutra. So we can have a response to this text. There's a paradox of the Naga Princess, right? She is an 8-year-old girl, and she is animal / human / spirit. Her body is not the body of a Buddha, but she does everything in that body. She actually doesn't take rebirth, and first is born as a man into a noble family and go through all these stages that are typically expected of a Buddha. And there's different ways we can see this sutra, and I'm going to offer some of those questions. But just to say that text is always unraveled through us, right? When I talk about reading a sutra with the body, right? It's through our own position and perspective and our own karmic conditions that we will relate to a text in whatever way we relate to the text, right? And the Lotus Sutra includes this in the way that it is structured. There's a sutra prior to the Lotus Sutra called the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, which is kind of discussing this, that when the Buddha teaches, beings will hear it according to their ability and their mind, right? So even one verse of the Dharma can have innumerable meanings and lead to liberation for many kinds of people. So some of the questions that this text brings up, or we could ask, could this text be used to uphold hegemony? It can be used to uphold the kind of status quo or standard viewpoints. Yes, it could be. We see that she does turn into a man, and some people will use this point, right, to say, oh, see, even though she was like a spirit animal girl, she still had to become a man. So, men inherently better. You have to do that, right? But could this text also be used to dismantle barriers, right? It's offering something different, which is that in this very body, as a woman or as a non-conforming body, you can still become a Buddha. That's a radical jump from maybe the majority at the time when the sutra and the Mahayana movement began. Could this text be used to initiate new models? I think that's something for us to explore. Can we apply some of the ideas in this text or in the story to our life now and some of the social issues we might be experiencing or social change and shifts? Excuse me, I'm was sick the last few days, so I might be coughing a bit as I talk. Um, So we don't live at the time of the Buddha. We don't live at the time this sutra was expounded or recorded. We live in a different time, and we all come from various cultures and backgrounds. So, knowing these texts can span over thousands of years, and they're located in a specific context that is now transformed and not universal. Whenever we're looking at texts, we do carry with us a bias of our time, our culture, our place, right? And whatever maybe our own values are. So it's very easy to look at text now and be like, oh, this one's like super misogynistic, or this one's really progressive. But actually, things that may have been very misogynistic in the text for us now might have been very progressive for that time, right? So looking at context and what could be or could not be accepted. You can even look at ourselves now, like socially the climate is different than like the 90s, right? Certain kinds of behaviors or ways relating to people might things that were funny, for example, in the 90s might not be so funny now. We might take it a lot differently, right? Something that was very progressive in the 90s might be very regressive if we did it now. I think we can find a lot of these types of examples, whether it's in more modern history or ancient history. So what we can look for, though, is what principles these texts are trying to inspire us to have or instill in us. What are the kind of spirit of the stories, right? And if we're looking at what a Buddha is, right? They're perfect in wisdom, skill, right, and compassion. So can the text lead us in that direction or not? And it lead us to more awareness of interdependence, have more social harmony, and create better conditions for everyone to achieve their happiness and freedom from suffering. That brings us into the next question, which is like, what is our justification for modern equalities and suffering? The whole question of Buddhism is suffering, right? And do we, or how do we use tradition, culture, or religion to justify suffering or use it as a catalyst for personal and social transformation? If we are we're just repeating things that were said as if they were facts. And they may have been, like I said, legitimate or valid at their time, but they're not now. Are we just perpetuating systems and structures, right, of inequity? So if our arguments are tradition, culture, and religion, can we find examples where these have changed with time, information, or context? I believe so. Um, I will give a couple examples in a moment with the Vinaya, but another part of modern lens, we have to ask ourselves, right, when as Buddhist practitioners dealing with multiple traditions, different kinds of people, and people will ask this, is there, can women become a Buddha? Is there more than one Buddha? Can I become a Buddha? Right? Are we able to answer this sincerely, or are we answering just from, well, this is what the text says, but this is what I believe, right? Or are we answering in ways to kind of popularize or satisfy our religion so our religion is seen in a positive light? So we should have some kind of honesty with our responses. So some of these questions that we ask, more than one Buddha, is enlightenment conditional with genitals, right? This is what comes down with gender in Buddhism, right? There's a lot to be covered with this in so many different texts and in institutions as well, monastic institutions, lay institutions, temples, and every culture has dealt with this in some better and worse ways. And then what changes from lifetime to lifetime, right? Even if we look at the Jataka tales, right? If we take them as metaphor or literal experiences the Buddha had prior to become a Buddha, right? What was changing, right? We can see even when he was an animal, right? There was still a certain direction or mindset or resolve. The mind was there. The body may have changed, but or the ability to affect the world, right? Certain limits, but the consciousness was continuity. And then the questions like, are the hierarchy of men over women, is this part of Buddhist teachings, or is this a condition at a time that was responded to? How much was added later on by monastic institutions, right? Because men had more access to recording the teachings, as there's some sort of adulteration that happened through text or a kind of weight given in one direction over another. So this is number two. Is the bias we find in text due to audience? And is it intended to be commentary? Or are some of these texts meant to be skillful means to address the conditions of that audience? And I'll give one example being like celibacy, right? So the Buddha was often talking to male monastics that were heterosexual. So what will he talk about, right? He's going to talk about how to view a woman's body as filthy and disgusting and as a corpse. Likewise, if he was talking to bhikshunis, I imagine, and if they were all heterosexual women, he might also talk about to visualize and see the man's body, right? The object of attraction, to see the bones and the blood and the pus and all these kinds of ways of seeing the body to balance the exaggeration we give to the body as being really pure and beautiful and attractive, right? To try to sober our relation and take away that kind of enchantment that might occur to beauty or youth or sexual attraction, right? So we're trying to maintain a celibate environment. So it doesn't mean that when we see some of these misogynistic types of terminology or writing that it was meant to be degrading of one category or another, but it might have had a certain function, right, for that audience, rather than being commentary on the subject of the talk. Hopefully, I made myself clear in that because I don't want to get that misinterpreted. Um, so does the Buddha's own alleged physical features, as well as bodhisattvas, fall within the majority of sex or gender experiences? One thing you may know if you look at these various features of the Buddha, some people have presented that he may have been intersex. They talk about his penis being hidden in the body and not being revealed, right? And I think at some point there's a story where he like reveals it to the deities or something, proves, this kind of feature. And some of the other features of the Buddha, if we really drew out these marks, right, it would look kind of alien. So something about the Buddha's body was not actually within the norm. Or, we have hagiography, right? So people in later generations write more fantastic kind of descriptions, like his body was golden, and even though he would be in a dirty place, dirt wouldn't stick to him, for example. So whether we take that literally or metaphorically, but we might say that the Buddha did not have an ordinary biological sex, right? Even when we talk about bodhisattvas, many of them are able to transform gender at will, as needed for the person they wish to connect to the Dharma. And I was bringing up, things that are not, what do you say? And at the time, they were very advanced, but maybe now it's not something we would do. One is the Vinaya says to use cow urine, ash, and dung as medicine. So these were the available and inexpensive medicines of the time. Even this fragrant wood stick as a toothbrush, which if you go to India, you can still find these toothbrush. It's kind of like a tea tree, I think, relative. It's like a minty. And people chew them, and so it's good for oral health. And so at the time that they didn't have maybe toothbrushes and same kinds of toothpaste, right? So even science and medicine have changed, and so we would more likely use modern drugs, prescription medicines to treat disease. Doesn't mean we can't use these things, but we have more options available. And so at the time, those were probably the very best or most common medical and hygiene practices that was being taught, right, to the monastics. And so if we invoke tradition and religion, or just, text says so, and we lean on this kind of literalism, then that might say that we should revert to, kind of ancient practices, right? Just for the sake of being authentic, or doing a kind of um, what's like anachronism, right? We like want to live in the old times because you like them, right? You have some sort of attraction or fantasy or idealization of ancient times. So we use this fantasy past as a model, right? Or a ruler for how we should be doing things now. So what does authentic mean? What do we mean when we're saying this? Um, why do we personally allow flexibility on certain concepts within our practice or religion, but not other concepts? Um, And so I'm going to ask also, well, I have a lot of questions from this one, story, right? There are certain ways we look at gender or the body or practice. And we can talk about disability, we can talk about age, we can talk about sexuality, we can talk about gender, we can talk about race, we can talk about culture. All of these things from different perspectives can be seen as obstacles or blessings, right? This is possible if we choose to engage it this way. But if we're making statements that X group has spiritual obstacles because ancients have said so, this is like a kind of appeal to antiquity, or authority, where we say because teacher or text said so, the sutra said so, or we make generalizations and create these kinds of dichotomies, like you know, women have five obstacles, right? So it's difficult, but men don't, so it's easier. So therefore, being a man is better, right? You could make this kind of sweeping generalization and then come to this conclusion. And then ways that we hold ourselves back, like we say we can't change or even critique, right, our own practice, our own faith, our own text. Because if we do, certain uncertain bad things will happen. So there's this kind of fear of these exaggerated consequences, or popular opinion. So everyone thinks this way. It's always been this way. So we shouldn't challenge it, and it must be correct. How do these, kind of sneak into our way of thinking, right? Um, and how might we engage these types of questions when we have certain reactions or assumptions or bias to whether ourselves or other people and their bodies or their life or their identity? Um, here is a shrine in Thailand of hand-carved bhikshuni elders. I found that was very nice. And I wanted to show that you do find some temples. You also see a Guanyin in the back. So, there's a bit of a mixing that occurs in Asia. There are a number of Thai temples that are mixed tradition, where people will be wearing different kinds of robes and following different kinds of practices, but under the same general precept rule and adjusting, chanting style or ritual style according to need. Um, And so I bring that up as that there's examples of flexibility and harmony that are possible. And there's a set of gathas, stories of senior bhikshunis who attained realization. And the one famous one you might come across when looking at gender is Venerable Soma. And in it, she's kind of questioned by Mara about how her body is not good enough, right? And she says, "What does womanhood matter at all? When the mind is concentrated well, when knowledge flows on steadily, as one sees correctly into Dharma, one to whom it might occur, I am a woman, or I am a man, or I'm anything at all, is fit for Mara to address." So she kind of gives up this idea that she is a woman or anything at all, right? Because if she holds on to this idea strongly, then she is fit for Mara to address. So the Naga Princess is talks about gender transformation as well as a species transformation and ability transformation. Um, and this also occurs in the Vinaya. And I won't read the whole thing, but I will say that there are two incidents where a man transforms into a woman overnight and a woman transforms into a man overnight. And they're both, bhikshu and bhikshuni, respectively. And when questioned, the Buddha basically says, yeah, go to the other side, right? Whatever offenses that are not in common, the monks, for the nuns, no offense, and your years of training and practice and discipleship, all those transfer over. There was no further comment on this. So it's either, no problem. We can assume these are sincere practitioners, what actually occurred for this transformation. Was it gender presentation? Was it a physical kind of magical transformation? We don't know. There's a limited amount of information. But from this, we can see that there was no issue in the transfer from one community to the next, right? So there was no inherent uh, uh, sex or gender bias, and it went both ways. And I believe it can occur multiple times even. Here are some images depicting more androgynous or gender fluid um, bodhisattvas. So you see in a period of Chinese art, Avalokiteshvara shown with very feminine features, but also this like very fine mustache and beard. And these kind of come and go throughout the art style, eventually moving more onto the kind of motherly image that one sees. But in all of the earlier times, Avalokiteshvara was male, and through culture, the gender expression transformed more to female. There's also another early sutra called Bondage. Surprisingly, some Theravada friends have not been aware of this, and I find it fascinating because I immediately picked up on it, looking into gender and Buddhism. And you can come to your own conclusion. But again, to shorten this, the Buddha gives two examples again for men and for women. He talks about how women are looking inward towards their femininity and their expressions of femininity in all the ways that we construct femininity. And then from that kind of position, looks outwardly towards masculine expressions and then gets excited and delighted and then wants to be bonded with what is outside. Right? So wanting to connect this internal identity with an external one, right? And that there's a kind of pleasure and happiness. And that through this, actually, she goes into bondage with men in reference to men. And he says, this is how a woman does not transcend her femininity. And he does the reverse too for men. So it's not like just women are being, described here. Men also do this internal masculine identity, gender construction, and then project a feminine one and wish to be bound with it. And so he talks about how there is a lack of bondage when we transcend gender, and when we're fixed on it, there's bondage. So I know sometimes I say, oh, this is like kind of suggesting there's like a non-binary or agender expression. I don't want to go in that way because I know it's rather could be contentious for people. But for myself as an agender person, I resonate with this. I don't have a internal attention to a particular gender. Don't think of my behaviors in a gendered way. I don't necessarily look at others in a gendered way unless they've kind of identified that or do it in such a way that you say it's like a standard within a culture. For example, femininity and masculinity look different across cultures. Certain behaviors in one culture might be read as masculine, but in another are read as feminine, vice versa. So we see that gender as a social construct is rather fluid. So for me, this particular sutra speaks to this. Hoshi Kurihara, she is a scholar from Japan, who wrote on the Therigatha. And again, I can share slides with you for those that want to read them more in detail. But she talks about how Buddhism was a refuge from violent abuse of families and the discrimination that people face in society. And the Buddha offered more equality and equity to women as monastics or lay practitioners than maybe they were finding in society at the time. And so this is quite interesting when you start looking at the Therigatha because they're sharing a lot of these very personal and emotional and touching experiences of where they had awakening, right? So I had some thoughts here for many of you have a Theravada background, so hopefully these are relatable. But we talk about shunyata, emptiness. And so that dissolves, usually we look at this as dissolving hierarchies and fixed realities, and we tend to negate absolutes, right? So we call this ultimate truth. And on the other side, we have the relative truth, which is typically for us as ordinary people based in ignorance, which reifies hierarchies and fixed realities. And we tend to seek absolutes. We even talk about this people we know, or like, this person's evil and a jerk, and this person's, I love them and they're a good person. And so I can see past all their red flags, and I can see past all of the good qualities and virtue of the person I've designated as being an enemy, right? And so, the more we engage and believe our thoughts around this, the more we can kind of solidify our story about reality. When we enter it from an emptiness perspective, or maybe in meditation, right, where we really are doing deep analysis of dependent origination or dependent arising emptiness, right, causes and conditions, we start to dissolve some of the this like concrete, like I have to hold on to this story, right, feeling. So we move between the two, between ultimate and relative, or between trying to understand emptiness and trying to see through our ignorance. So from meditation to day-to-day life, this back and forth occurs. Uh, Again, some visual break from reading, more images. Avalokiteshvara turning into a more maternal figure, but also contemplative and relaxed. So there's more feminine features that are being shown over time. Nagarjuna's Entreat of the Middle Way has some interesting phrases. So whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness, that being a dependent origination is itself the middle way. So here we say like caste, rank, political system, social structures, all of these things are empty of inherent nature. They're not naturally so. They don't have these qualities from their own side, but these are a function that appears because of various causes and conditions. With a lot of these, those causes and conditions are people, they're society, they're things that we think up and structure. And so while this phrase is dealing with being or ontology, we can by implication extend this to society, right? You even look at things like money, right? Money doesn't have inherent value. It's determined through a collective process, right? And that's why it can fluctuate. So we can see even like money or stock market, stock exchange. These are really great examples of impermanence, right? Every minute, every moment, it's shifting. The value is shifting. But where is the value coming from? Right? It's not coming from the money itself. It's coming from the actions, right? And there's another one: without relying on convention, the ultimate cannot be taught. We have to use conventional reality to discuss ultimate reality. And so without understanding the ultimate, nirvana is not attained. So we have to penetrate ultimate reality or truth of emptiness in order to attain liberation. So again, while relative language and structures are useful and very functional, and we do need them, we have a place called Metta Center. I have a name called Myogen. We need these things to relate to one another as ordinary beings. But we can also understand that they're not ultimately real, and they arise due to these transient conditions. So without this, we become locked into our reality. We become locked into our story of how things are, right? Whatever we're feeling at the time, or thinking at the time, or experiencing at the time can become the truth, right? And the only truth, even. And when that happens, we start entering into all kinds of conflict, all kinds of problems, right? We're establishing an us and a them, a really clear right and wrong, like and dislike. And from that basis, we make all kinds of choices in our actions. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to pick some. Again, because as I was telling before, I overslide. I create too many slides because there's so many things I want to share that I think can be very thought-provoking and interesting. But I am selecting from different texts. So before was the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which is a text, Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. It's very popular in the Tibetan traditions. And then the Moha Jirguan, the great Shamatha Vipassana by the founder of the Tendai tradition, Jir Yi. He kind of goes further with that earlier idea about society, right? So the Dharma of kings and the Dharma of beggars, so the reality, the phenomena of kings and beggars are, in essence, neither pure nor impure. The mind constructs distinctions, but reality is undivided. So from the ultimate view, there's not a distinction, but from the relative view, there is a distinction. And he says the highest truth is that no dharma can be grasped, right? Neither noble nor base, neither ruler nor subject. All are merely names like reflections and water. So they rely on each other to define themselves. Same when we look at gender, if we have a world with no women, right? Can you say that all the beings there are men if there's no reference, right? Actually, there's no men either, because you need some reference point for gender to occur. Um, and so same like with a king or a subject, right? They need each other to define themselves. Here are other depictions of Avalokiteshvara. As you see, these are a little bit more masculine in feature. I think the one on the left is from and the others are from different countries like Burma, Myanmar, ancient styles. Lamrim Chenmo is another Tibetan text by Lama Tsongkhapa, who says, again, the king is only a king because he is designated so by others. The servant is only a servant by the same convention. Neither has an essence that makes him so. And then we look at wealth and power and labor. None of these have independent existence. So now, we've moved from gender into society as a whole in the commentary. This is what happens when we start looking at things from the emptiness and interdependence side. And I think this, for me, comes out of the Naga Princess story, because she is a kind of a ultimate example of someone that should not be able to attain enlightenment, and she does it faster than anyone else, faster than is commonly taught. Right? So she breaks a lot of the conventions and assumptions because of coming at it from this view of emptiness. So I'm going to skip through these, go into some of the other points. So personally, right, can we hold both conventional identities, right? My name, who I am, like where I'm from, my history, my good and bad past, my hopes and dreams and fears, all these things that make up my identity. Can I hold that conventional self with a non-self simultaneously, right? Can both of these be true at the same time? And we say, yes, this is how a Buddha is, right? A Buddha is able to dwell in both the relative and the ultimate at the same time. Until we achieve that, we're said to move between both of them, right? And if socially we just operate from emptiness, this is a kind of deranged wisdom, right? This is like when people say, don't worry about, misogyny or gender inequality. That's just, it's just empty. You're just attached to this experience. So you should just let it go because it's emptiness. This is actually not dealing with the conventional experience of suffering, right? And also, if we go too far on the other side, right, which is like, various inequalities, whether it's class or gender or sexuality, this is the only thing that has to be dealt with. This is true suffering, right? This is the true identity. And we kind of keep building that up, not able to see the fluidity of it, right? We can also get locked into a certain kind of pattern. So there is a middle way, right? There's somewhere in between these two that we strive to operate in. And so I often ask too, is there a lag, right? Is there a gap between our theory and these really nice ideas about the Dharma and emptiness and compassion and loving kindness and patience, and where we actually are and what we're doing and how we are relating to people, whether it's as an individual or as a group, right? How are we structuring the organizations we're in, right? Are we perpetuating certain types of ideas or behavior from society in our Buddhist practice, and then claiming that it is Dharma and that's just how things are? Or are we able to use the freedom and creativity that is granted, right, when we understand emptiness, to explore new ways of being that address conventional suffering and our kind of existential question, right? And there's some counterpoints, particularly to the Dragon Princess, right? So also from the Lotus Sutra, we can pick, you can always pick a sutra and interpret it through a different lens, a position. So in chapter 5, the medicinal herbs, there's a phrase, the Buddha knows that most beings are attached to forms, right? So, we're stuck in our ignorant conventional worlds as the only world. So he uses various distinctions, right? Says this is like this and it's like that to lead them. To suddenly declare all are equal, like from emptiness, right, would confuse them. And this is true. Like we try it out, if you want, confuse people. But grab someone that has no idea about Buddhism and just tell them, everything is empty, right, and nothing has an essence, and you're not a human being, you're not a person, your suffering is not real. Um, it will sound like a kind of nihilistic viewpoint. They're like, what are you talking about? I punch you in the face, you're going to feel it. That's real, right? So if we just say everything's equal and empty to someone that is attached to forms, it would be chaotic and confusing and just make no sense. So total dismantling of any kind of social structure or identity, right, can lead to confusion and inability to determine what is useful or wholesome for oneself or for others. So actually, we do need identity. We do need labels because we're working in a world of form, right? Um, so we can also respect and relate to these things in various ways. But this is one of the counterpoints, right? Is that, well, things have names, and so we should not just blur them through, a totally emptiness perspective. And then there's another sutra that said one is poor because of past stinginess and one is oppressed because of past abuse of power. Um, this could be a little spicy for folks. If we use this line to say whatever oppression you're experiencing is because you did that type of oppression to someone else in the past, it can become very blame feeling. Um, or, say even in the worst kind of way, oh, you deserve, right, this because of past karma. So, I don't need to help you or be compassionate because you're burning off karma. Isn't that great, right? We can move into some pretty monstrous ways of responding to people if we pick out these kinds of lines without other context, right? So yeah, experience conditions are due to past karma. So the path is frequently focused on these personal transformation, but we can also look at the impersonal and social, right, aspects and how we're contributing to supporting suffering or not. Or even talking about why should we change society? Why should we even be focused on having a more equitable world, right? Why does it matter if a dragon girl can become a Buddha, right? The Buddha said men are the best equipped, right? And it takes three kalpas or three eons, right? So why do we need this alternative, right? This is just people trying to offer a hopeful viewpoint. The world is on fire, samsara is terrible, we should escape it. Um, and so we can see, Shakyamuni Buddha is reported as critiquing structures like caste, right? But these are things are not innate or designed by the universe, right? And at the same time, he didn't advocate for like widespread social reform. He never said like, you should just all undo the caste system. We should go out and protest, et cetera, et cetera. But he just changed the way he was relating and the way his disciples were relating, right? So through their behavior, those structures changed within their communities and the people they interacted with. So it's a different kind of social change and protest. Numerous sutras also mention the benefit of women praying to be men in the next life because of all the troubles they have. Again, we can see this as a time and context place, time and context type of concept. Um, it's more than likely at the time, women did not have the level of autonomy they have now. You can see that in the Vinaya that many of the precepts for women had to do with sexual assault, and safety. And that's why there's many more precepts, right? Or because women were maybe not by the Buddha, but by others, non-Buddhists or society or even monastics that just hadn't overcome their own judgment, were seen as inferior or not equal. So if he just suddenly declared a massive shift, probably would have not gone over very well. But what he did provide was very radical for the time. Um, so active social transformation, if he um, did that, it may have had the unintended effect of strengthening, identity. Um, we can see that now too, and I am very sensitive to it as a queer person, right? People will say, "Oh, well, you're a monastic, so you shouldn't have gender. You shouldn't." How do you say, you shouldn't get involved in this queer gender stuff, right? Just like that's all political. But at the same time, we don't hold that same standard to cisgendered or heterosexual monastics. Like, oh, have you given up your heterosexuality? Have you given up your masculinity or femininity, right? So, there can be tension between this, whether we're strengthening our attachment to identity through dismantling different kinds of hierarchies, or if we're freeing our attachment to identity, whether it's cultural or gender or sexuality, right? There's always this kind of tension that's occurring. Another one that's brought up for monastics, and I bring this up to ask yourselves as lay people as well. What is your role in social transformation, right? How can and how do monastics support that, and how do you as lay practitioners support monastics so that collectively we can create better environments, right, for everyone, for Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike, to more easily engage in wholesome actions, and not, how do you say, like have lack of resources or autonomy or competence. Um, so for monastics, we're usually unable to be close to secular power structures. Like, we can't run for offices and get involved in local politics or have parties. People can, right? Um, and the goal of monastics is more focused on internal causes of suffering, not the external results that are experienced in society. I think there is a need to address that, of course, but the focus, let's say, is more internal. Um, and also, we're advised not to become involved with influential people, right, or involved in social justice projects or political projects or protests, and be nonpartisan. And some communities also don't want monastics talking about any kind of secular issue. Like, some would not like me, for example, talking about gender and sexuality and social inequity. Just stick to the text, right? That's what we're here for. But then I always question, if our goal is to address suffering, then whether the suffering is secular, or the suffering is a religious, internal, existential, it's still suffering, right? And there are still methods to approaching it and handling it. And the Buddha's teachings were a lot, many, like maybe three-quarters was towards lay communities. Yeah. Something with the Naga Princess I want to bring up. She turns into a man and then becomes a Buddha. And this is one of the things that gets taken into, you can take it in a couple of different directions. One is that, see, it's evidence that you have to have a man's body. The other one that I follow is actually she's displaying how there's nothing that special about having a man's body. She's able to do it without rebirth. She's able to do it in an instant. So in a way, to me, it's kind of like a joke on Shariputra and the Arhats who are putting forward this idea that you can only be a man. She's kind of taking that power from them because they were born as men. They did not undergo a transformation, yet she was capable of doing so. The other question that's brought up is the speed at which she attains enlightenment. People go, well, how does she do that so fast, right? But we don't ask, why is it taking the Shavakas so long, right? Why is it taking them 3 kalpas to become a Buddha? It took Buddha only a few years, right? I mean, he had other lifetimes, but in this lifetime, it took him a few years. And in the story of the Naga Princess, she did it in an instant, right? She like pulled something from her pocket, basically, gave it to the Buddha, and then did that whole thing. Um, and one of the reasons this is given is that for our world system, our conditions, it needs to be taught in a way that takes 3 kalpas, right? And it's not that it actually takes 3 kalpas, but we kind of need that to motivate us to work hard, right? versus the realm the Naga Princess came from. The collective conditions were very different, right? She practices with great compassion and great faith and great diligence, and she quickly generates the aspiration to become a Buddha. While for our world, this is not the case. And if we look at those two examples, the Arhat's talking about three kalpas, she's talking about an instant, and the Buddha is showing a kind of middle one, right? He shows a bunch of lifetimes, and then he shows a few years of practice within one lifetime to become a Buddha. So actually, there's a variety of approaches, but these are all determined by cause and condition. They're not set in stone. It's not like the universe was designed and that the only way to become a Buddha is through, these exact steps, right? If we say that there can be multiple universes and realms and worlds that we can't even imagine, there's probably many different kinds of beings and different kinds of Buddhas and different kinds of teachings that are suitable for those situations, right? The Dharma is always taught according to causes and conditions. Um, okay, on time. I know there might be some questions and comments, and I'm happy to take any of those.
Thank you so much, Venerable. That was an
Sorry,
absolutely
we're on a
phenomenal.
journey.
Yeah, that was I was making notes the whole time. That was really enjoyable to listen and hear you share not only the story of the sutra, but then also a lot of the explanations for that. I personally have a lot of questions. So I'm gonna take chair's prerogative, or pejorative to ask the first question, but I do encourage anyone, if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand function or ask them in the chat if you want to. So, Venerable, when I was listening to you explain the story, when you got to the part where the Naga Princess transformed into a male to become enlightened, I
Right.
originally thought, oh, okay, I can see this sort of like traditional more perspective of gender and leading to enlightenment. But then as you spoke, and I thought and reflected more on that, I actually ended up being in a position where it was, to me, the whole aspect of the Naga Princess becoming enlightened was actually a commentary on the process, not the fixed
Mm,
identity, not going from
right.
Naga Princess to male. It was
Yeah.
about almost this simplistic argument that, it doesn't really matter. Just get on with it. Just it doesn't
Yeah.
matter
Yeah.
what level of appearance or gender or age or anything. It's actually quite simple. You take out the jewel, you become enlightened. If the
Yeah.
Naga Princess can do it, then what is everyone else complaining? So to me, I almost took this more like comical interpretation from
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah.
that wasn't my question. Sorry, I do actually have
No,
a
that's fine.
question.
No,
I
I love
really,
it.
I really enjoyed the kind of spectrum going from the extreme of this absolute fixation of identity that we can see that many of us, have to navigate in some ways of,
Yeah.
acknowledging forms, acknowledging their existence, to the other extreme of having not self and not viewing anything as being
Mm,
inherently of an essence.
mm, mm.
When do you think it's appropriate for us to, as much as we would love to have the middle way, there are times where we'll be shifting in either direction. When do you think it's appropriate for us as lay people to jump into the world of, I suppose,
Mode.
forms
Right.
more so than trying to maintain a more middle perspective?
Yeah, this is a question I ask a lot as well. I don't, I can't give you like a formula or an
Mm,
answer. And I ask this too, as someone that in the past more involved in like social activism, more of a radical kind a little bit.
mm,
But yeah, where's the line and where's the boundary? And how sometimes going into the emptiness side you can just end up being a doormat, right? Because you're
mm,
like, oh well, it's empty, so go ahead and abuse me or disrespect or abuse others, right? It's all empty. That's quite possible. And on the other end, if we get too fixated on it, we start creating enemies out of people, right?
mm,
We can't see that there's they're going to change, I'm going to change, the situation's going to change. um, I think where the line is what can you handle, right?
Mm.
What can you personally cope with, right? Because if the situation is so powerful that you are overrun by your emotions, and you can only react with unwholesome response, then you've gone too far. And I would say, you should deal with the situation on a relative way. Um, and later, when you're in a more safe or stable environment, deal with it from the emptiness kind of way, right? If we're just trying to apply emptiness while we're in the middle of chaotic situation and we have no familiarity with it, no stability with it, um, I don't think it would be very helpful. I think it will just be emotionally damaging. Um,
Mm.
I think we'll not do very well. I think those types of meditations are better suited for when we're not in the extremes of emotion, so that we have a resource to draw on. Um,
Mm.
Saying like, when do we practice patience with people? Well, it'd be good to practice all the time, but can I practice patience with someone that is like screaming in my face about something? Maybe not, right? Maybe I need to be practicing patience when I'm not around those people, so that when I do meet them, I have something to use. It's not that I just deal with my anger when I'm having anger, right? And I don't
Mm.
just deal with emptiness when I'm having strong moments of fixed identity. Um, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I think that varies from person to person what they're capable of handling, right?
Yeah, no,
We
absolutely.
usually,
And yeah. I think for me, it's also a bit of a tricky sort of existence that we find ourselves in where we would want to actually adopt fixed identities for very particular purposes. And that
right,
becomes a little bit, at times it almost can feel it sits at opposite with what we want to approach from the perspective of Buddhism around there not
right,
being this intrinsic self. So, an example from the Australian context is there's a lot of legitimate focus that we want as a society on domestic violence, in particular
mm,
male gendered violence against
right,
women. But
mm,
there's also this element of, well, are we also creating this fixation and obsession with fixed identities to try to deal with this particular
the
problem
problem,
in of
right, right,
itself? So yeah, it becomes almost a bit of a never-ending argument, I suppose. But it's
right,
yeah, I think it's something that, a lot of us as lay people, we have to try to, really struggle between, well, when is hyperfixating on identity something that's actually needed,
yeah, no,
versus when is it something that's not actually going to achieve or help us fulfill whatever goals or aims that we might be wanting to do.
right, right. And we're living in a relative world. So, I mean, I can't just suddenly be like, I don't have a name, I'm not a person, and then like
Mm.
walk around and expect to function in any kind of meaningful way. Um, and I see your point too about like a gender and domestic violence. Even talking about that, people will talk about, oh, um, majority of violence is like, or like sexual assault or domestic violence is men to women, right?
Mm.
It's not saying, people will then be like, well, not all men. And it's like, of course, not all men, right? But
Mm.
we're talking about this statistically, it's a lot of men. And so what's going on there, right? How are they relating to their masculinity and identity as a man? It's not
Mm.
saying that being a man is a bad thing, but to look at how masculinity is being held onto or performed.
Mm.
Um, and not that it's something that you have to give up. You can be who you are, right? And that's fine. It's not a bad thing. Not that all men are bad, but something about the way men are being educated, right, is prioritizing certain types of behavior, right?
Mm.
So it's not a value judgment on all men, right? We can see this kind of thing that happens in a lot of other categories too, like
Mm.
with like different genders or sexuality. We will conflate, right, the person, like take it personally, like, oh, me, you're talking about me, right? When we're really talking about like an expression that's happening in a collective way, rather than like negation of who you are.
Mm.
That makes sense. It gets very emotional for people, I think you are aware of that.
Mm.
That it gets very emotional for people when we start talking about their identity, right? Because it's who we are, right?
Mm.
We can't undo that. We can try to relax our feelings about it and see, our ideas about ourselves and our feelings about ourselves are also transient and temporary. And like in this lifetime, I'm such and such a person, but I've been every other type of person too, right?
Hmm.
So why would I get so upset, right? That someone says something about who I am, right? Um, this is one of countless bodies I've had, right?
Hmm.
And one of countless identities I've had, right?
Perfect. Thank you. There
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
question from Eugene, which I'll read out for you, Venerable, which was, thank you for the wise teachings, Venerable. I wondered how in the sutta Sariputra superficially appears to be quite insulting, but do you think he's actually asking questions for the benefit of others and doesn't really believe in their premise?
Yeah. So there's different takes. It's going to depend on your interpretation. One is that it's totally a dig at the Shravaka vehicle hearers and like Shariputra being like the like iconic, hearer, right? So he should be like the most wise. And so why is he like kind of, you know, being a jerk, right? Here and asking this question. The other lens, which was what you're pointing at, and it's mentioned elsewhere in Lotus Sutra, is that the Buddha only taught one vehicle, right? So that means that hearers can actually be bodhisattvas practicing towards becoming a Buddha, and they're demonstrating the Shravaka vehicle, Shravaka method for beings that would be best transformed by the Shravaka method. And they're fulfilling their bodhisattva vows while on their path to becoming a Buddha, but they, in a sense, that, forgotten that. But the vow is like kind of operating on a deep subconscious level. And so they have this rebirth and they go through all these stages and these steps and teachings. Another possibility is that he very well knows what he's asking. He's doing this for the benefit of the doubtful, like you're saying. He's asking this um, with this very specific intention. And you can say, like in the Vimalakirti Sutra, Shariputra already knows, that gender doesn't have an essence or like a fixed inherent quality to it, right? It's something that's transcended. So here he also knows this. So again, he's asking not for himself, right, but for those that would not believe and need the demonstration. So sometimes when there's questions asked, um, like Manjushri is always asking questions in sutras, but he knows the answer. He's just asking for the benefit of the audience, right? Um, there's a lot of cases like this. Uh, so yeah, very good insight and questions. So thank you.
And Tina said, like Sariputra in the Heart Sutra as
Mm-mm.
well.
Right, right.
Venerable, there was one earlier comment that I think might be the last question we have for tonight, where Simran asked about the translation wording of attain the Dharma. It was
Uh,
from memory, it was in maybe the first or second slide within your slide pack, Venerable.
okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah, Simran, am I right in assuming that that's about what I suppose, the translation of attain the Dharma is?
Yes, what it means to attain the Dhamma. It was in one of the earlier slides.
Right. Yeah, it's from chapter 16 of Lotus Sutra. I will check the other translations and see what they mean. I think, pretty much this means realizing the Dharma, realizing Buddhahood, quickly attain the Dharma, like enter the path and become a Buddha.
Mhm.
I'll check the other translations. So.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I can send them in the chat, the WhatsApp, maybe.
That'll be great if you're happy to send
That's
them.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Venerable, it is 8:30. I personally will have about seven. Yeah, I have so many other questions that I won't get to tonight. But thank you so much for that absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful talk. It was really fascinating to hear, and it was really wonderful to hear both the story, but also then your analysis of it and go into some of the counterpoints and everything associated with that. So we're very grateful for that tonight. Would you like to finish us off with either well, entirely up to you, whoever you'd
Yeah,
like to
sure.
finish.
Yeah, sure. And I just also want to say I'm always open to emails or messages. If you have questions or comments that you feel like sharing, I'm happy to hear. So, or if you want the slides, just feel free to reach out. Again, we can dedicate the merits. So the results, right, of our studying, listening, contemplating, critiquing, analyzing, discussing, all the ways that we're engaging with the Dharma. May any of these results be dedicated to full enlightenment, and may we be able to become Buddhas, skilled in teaching, compassionate, able to lead others as well to Buddhahood. Homage to the fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Homage to the fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Homage to the fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you all for your time and your patience and kindness and listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Venerable.
you.
Just some quick announcements for those very quickly at the end. We do have our usual weekly schedule of Metta Center events with yoga on tomorrow night, the meditation classes on Wednesdays. If you did want any further insight, please get in touch to Metta Center for any of our upcoming events. Venerable, thank you so much. It was wonderful to see you again. Thank you all for your attendance tonight, and hope you all have a great rest of your day or evening, depending where you are in the world. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.